I want you to imagine a scenario
Yeah.
and really just try to picture this vividly.
Okay, I'm ready.
So it's March 2020. The world outside has literally just shut down. The news is terrifying. But you are quarantined with your family in this completely idyllic, isolated home on Martha's Vineyard.
Right, so you're totally tucked away from the chaos.
Exactly. You feel safe. And your husband of 20 years, the man you've built your entire adult life around, has just made a perfect golden brown roast chicken for dinner.
Wow.
Right. The house smells amazing. It feels incredibly cozy. It's the absolute picture of domestic security in the middle of a deeply insecure time.
Which is what everyone was craving right then.
Exactly. But then, while you're cleaning up the kitchen, you check your phone. And there is a voicemail from a complete stranger.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And the stranger tells you that your husband is having an affair with his wife.
Just completely out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. And not only that, but the mistress has just attempted suicide and is currently in the back of an ambulance.
My gosh.
So obviously, you confront your husband, and by dawn, he is walking out the front door in his winter boots.
Yeah.
Forever.
It's breathtakingly brutal.
It really is, and that is exactly where we're starting today's deep dive. We are looking at the source material from Strangers, a memoir of marriage by Belle Burden.
And, we really want to stress to you that this isn't just a post-mortem of a bad breakup.
No, not at all. It is a psychological autopsy of how a seemingly perfect partnership just completely evaporates overnight.
Yeah, the source material provides this really profound look at the hidden dangers of outsourcing your financial and emotional agency, and it deeply examines the generational legacy of women who are, basically conditioned to suffer in silence.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack a highly unsettling question for you. How well can we truly know the people closest to us?
Such a scary thought.
It is. And I mean, how do you reconstruct an identity when the very foundation of your reality is just suddenly gone?
Well, to understand the sheer magnitude of this crash, I think we have to examine the before picture.
Yeah, let's do that. Because Bill paints this picture using a recurring, really powerful metaphor from their property on Martha's Vineyard. The ospreys.
Right, the birds. James, Belle's husband, was deeply, almost singularly obsessed with this pair of ospreys that nested on their land.
Obsessed is the right word. He was fascinated by them.
Yeah, and what captivated him was their biological drive for loyalty. I mean, ospreys are known to mate for life. They migrate thousands of miles separately over the winter, but they return to the exact same nest, to the exact same partner, every single spring.
It's incredibly romantic.
It is. James even went as far as befriending local wildlife experts to track one specific bird, which they actually named Belle.
Which is just wild in hindsight. He would track its winter migration patterns online. He built this whole family culture around, waving at the birds when they returned.
Celebrating their loyalty.
Exactly. It was this beautiful living symbol of the nest he had supposedly built for his own wife and children.
Supposedly, yeah.
But, and this is where I really struggle with this whole sudden switch-flipping narrative that happens next.
So.
Well, isn't it more likely that he was just desperately unhappy for years, giving her subtle clues, and she was just too wrapped up in her idyllic vineyard life to notice the breadcrumbs?
I mean, it is entirely natural to assume that. We all want to assume that.
It makes us feel safer, right?
Exactly. Sudden, unprovoked abandonment breaks our fundamental understanding of human behavior. We desperately want to believe there were warning signs so we can protect ourselves.
So we can say, oh, I would have seen that coming.
Right. But what Belle discovers, and what behavioral psychology backs up in these specific types of cases, is that these individuals really do not leave breadcrumbs.
Really? None at all?
They actively maintain the illusion of the perfect marriage right up until the very morning they vanish, because they require the stability of the nest while they secretly build their exit strategy.
Oh, wow. So he needed her to be comfortable.
Yes. And when the exit strategy is forced into the light, like it was by that voicemail, the facade drops instantly.
And the drop is terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill describes him walking into their bedroom at 6 a.m., fully dressed, carrying a tote bag.
Ready to go.
Yeah. His eyes, which were warm just the night before over that roast chicken, she describes them as narrowed and icy.
Complete transformation.
He looks at his wife of 20 years and says, "You'll be fine. You're still young." She was 50 years old.
It's just so cold.
And it gets worse. To prove his new mistress is a real viable replacement, he actually pulls out his phone and proudly shows Belle the woman's LinkedIn profile.
Oh my gosh.
I know. He points out her Ivy League credentials and her recent corporate promotion, almost like, I don't know, like he's showing off the specs on a new sports car. And then he just walks out the door.
See, from a neurological and psychological standpoint, Belle's brain literally cannot process this incoming data.
I wouldn't be able to either.
Right, we are talking about severe cognitive dissonance here. How does the human brain reconcile the man who meticulously tracked a tagged osprey's migration route with the man who coldly abandons his own children in the middle of a global pandemic?
They seem like two completely different people.
Because they basically are, in her mind now. Cognitive dissonance occurs when you hold two fundamentally conflicting beliefs or realities at the very same time.
And the brain just can't handle it.
The brain often short circuits. It rejects the new information because accepting it means accepting that your previous reality, your safety, your judgment, all of it was entirely illusory.
Yeah, you're not just losing your husband, you're losing your trust in your own reality.
Exactly.
And I feel like that cognitive dissonance only deepens when we look at James's behavior during the separation.
Oh, the April meeting.
The April meeting. Okay, so a few weeks after he leaves, he's pressured to come back to the Vineyard to finally tell their teenage daughters about the divorce in person.
Which he hasn't done yet.
Right, so he flies in on a Bar 8 seaplane. He walks into the house wearing a mask, paces back and forth in front of the glass doors, and delivers the news that he is destroying their family without even making eye contact with his kids.
Can you imagine?
One of the daughters, Carrie, literally wails in agony and runs down the stairs. And James's immediate reaction is to turn to Belle and say, "I'm starving, can you make me a sandwich?"
That detail, the sandwich, is really where the psychological profile of this whole event comes into sharp focus.
But wait, she actually makes it for him.
She does.
She makes him a high-quality turkey and avocado sandwich on sourdough bread. She adds sea salt and mustard.
Too salt, ew.
She puts it on a nice bamboo plate with a cloth napkin.
Yeah.
She literally writes that she thought if she made a good enough sandwich, maybe he would reconsider and regret leaving.
Which breaks your heart. But what we are observing here is a behavioral pattern that Belle later identifies through her research as the runaway husband syndrome.
Runaway husband.
Yeah. It's a documented phenomenon where a spouse, usually in middle age, abruptly abandons a seemingly stable marriage without any prior conflict or counseling.
Just vanishes.
Right. But to physically walk away from your weeping children and your devastated partner without psychologically collapsing under the weight of your own guilt, you have to execute a complete detachment.
So wait, are you saying he genuinely didn't feel the guilt in that room?
I am saying his psychological defense mechanisms overrode it completely.
Wow.
The person shedding their life has to entirely rewrite the narrative of their own history. They have to convince themselves that they are either the tragic victim of a stifling marriage or the brave hero of a new romantic journey.
Right, they can't be the bad guy.
Never. And this is why James can text Belle later that same afternoon and say, "That was a great visit."
After an incredibly traumatic event.
Exactly.
He rewrites the reality of the afternoon so he doesn't have to be the villain.
Precisely. And the source material actually traces this survival mechanism back to James's childhood.
Oh, right, his family's history.
Yeah, his family suffered a sudden, hidden, and totally catastrophic financial ruin when he was young.
Which is traumatizing for a kid.
Extremely. For a child in that environment, the only way to survive the chaos of adults losing control is to build impenetrable emotional walls. You compartmentalize. You shut down your emotional receptors.
So you don't feel the panic.
Right. So for James, compartmentalizing his emotions became a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. When the pressure of his double life finally hit the breaking point, his brain relied on its oldest trick. He hit the eject button and dissociated entirely from the pain he was inflicting on others.
It's so wild. And, it is easy to look at that sandwich request and just see a callous, dissociated man. But while he is keeping Belle busy making his lunch upstairs, what is he actually doing?
He's not just waiting for food.
No. He isn't just sitting there. He is down in the basement, furiously ripping open cardboard boxes, sweating, desperately hunting for their missing prenuptial agreement.
The emotional detachment wasn't just a psychological defense mechanism. It was a highly effective distraction tactic for a financial ambush.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this transition from emotional betrayal to financial jeopardy is where the narrative really shifts from a tragedy to a thriller. We really have to examine the mechanics of Belle's financial vulnerability here.
Because it's shocking.
If you are listening to this right now, I know you are probably screaming at your steering wheel.
Right.
Because Belle was a highly educated corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm, Davis Polk.
Right.
Her literal job was risk mitigation. So how does a woman with that background just hand over her financial agency?
It is such a vital question, and it really speaks to the illusion of the modern partnership. Belle did not make a sudden, foolish mistake.
It wasn't overnight.
No. She engaged in a slow, normalized erosion of her own independence. She gave up her demanding corporate career to raise their children, creating this unspoken but very common societal bargain.
A classic trade-off.
Exactly. He would work all hours to provide the capital, and she would handle the domestic sphere and the children.
But she didn't just give up her future earning potential. She brought significant assets into the marriage to begin with.
Yes, she did.
Belle had personal family trusts from her own wealthy background. Over the years, she drained those trusts to buy their Tribeca apartment in New York and the Martha's Vineyard house outright in cash.
Her money.
Her money. And here's the part that just makes you gasp. Because she wanted James to feel secure and equal in the marriage, she put his name on both deeds.
Even though he didn't contribute financially to them?
Not a single dime to the purchase of either property.
We also have to factor in the prenuptial agreement here.
Oh, the prenup. Let's talk about the prenup.
Early in the marriage, they signed a prenup that heavily favored James, who eventually went on to make massive amounts of money at a hedge fund.
Right.
The turning point is that in 2019, recognizing that the document was wildly outdated and unfair, they actually sat down with a lawyer and verbally agreed to extinguish that prenup.
Verbally agreed. But they never officially signed the final paperwork to kill it.
They did not. And in the legal world, a verbal agreement to void a contract is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to enforce when millions of dollars are on the line.
Obviously.
So when James leaves, he weaponizes that unextinguished prenup against her. He uses the legal leverage to threaten to force the sale of the very homes she bought with her own family's money.
It's like, I want to ask you, the listener, isn't this what we are taught marriage is? Total sharing.
We are absolutely taught that.
But looking at Belle's financial deference, it's like sitting in the passenger seat of a car, putting on a blindfold and throwing the map out the window just because you trust the driver.
That's a great analogy. And Belle makes a really compelling argument in the memoir about the psychology behind this. She points out that in her specific social circle, women are almost conditioned to view financial deference as a form of romance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the source material argues that what feels like protection to a wife like the husband saying, "Don't worry your pretty head about the taxes and the investments, I've got it," is actually a massive transfer of power.
So it's masquerading as caretaking.
Exactly. The author is highlighting a systemic vulnerability. Society encourages this dynamic under the guise of care, but when the marital switch flips, that control is absolute.
Because he had all the logins, all the info.
Because James controlled the accounts, he knew exactly where every dollar was. Belle found herself in a position where she literally had to ask the man who just abandoned her for permission to spend money on groceries during their separation.
That is just humiliating. But as the memoir explores, it is not just societal conditioning at play here. It is a deeply ingrained familial legacy.
Oh, her family history is fascinating.
It really is. Belle was carrying a generational expectation of silence that she suddenly had to confront.
And when we look at how communities respond to this kind of rupture, it raises this fascinating sociological question, Why do the victims of highly visible betrayals often stay quiet?
Right.
For Belle, the expectation to absorb the pain silently was practically in her DNA. Her grandmother was the famous mid-century socialite Babe Paley.
Babe Paley, who famously endured her husband Bill Paley's highly public, totally humiliating affairs.
Exactly.
And those affairs were notoriously exposed by her close friend, the writer Truman Capote, which created this massive scandal.
Exactly the same lineage.
Yeah.
And Belle's own mother also endured infidelity from partners.
It's a pattern.
It is. In their prominent, wealthy East Coast world, the unwritten rule was always identical. Powerful men are expected to behave badly, and women are expected to stoically, silently clean up the mess.
Just sweep it under the rug.
You do not make a scene, you do not complain to the public. You preserve the family image at all costs, even if it destroys you internally.
And you see that exact expectation of silence play out in real time at their Vineyard Country Club.
The country club scenes are infuriating.
So infuriating. After James leaves, Belle is essentially treating her trauma by taking these long, solitary walks around the island, and she runs into people from the club.
And you'd think they would support her.
You would think. But instead of supporting the woman who was just abandoned, the community reflexively defends James.
Unbelievable.
One woman praises him right to Belle's face. Another man at a dinner party actually calls James's affair with a married woman a love story and suggests it is a beautiful thing.
To the ex-wife.
To her face. There are even whispers that Belle might lose her club membership entirely, simply because she is now a divorced woman and no longer attached to his status.
Because the sociological instinct of that specific community was to protect the powerful, wealthy man and erase the inconvenient, grieving wife.
They just wanted her to disappear.
They wanted her to adopt the persona of the chic French divorcee.
Right.
That is the woman who quietly slips away, never speaks ill of her ex-husband, and allows the man to seamlessly transition into his new life without facing any social friction or consequences whatsoever.
Just a smooth transition for him.
James even explicitly instructed Belle to tell their friends the divorce was a joint decision. He expected her compliance because, historically, she had always been compliant. Her own brother referred to her growing up as Belle the Good.
But Belle the Good finally gets angry.
She does.
And this is where the narrative shifts from a study in victimhood to an incredible study in empowerment. Belle goes back to the one thing she was told she could never do, which is right.
It's such a crucial pivot in her psychological recovery.
Tell us about that.
Well, when Belle was in college, she was actually a highly promising fiction writer. But a harsh, dismissive critique of her work from an older male student named Greg completely crushed her confidence.
One guy named Greg just ruins it.
Right. She put down her pen, abandoned her creative voice, and went to law school instead. But now, decades later, waking up in terror at 6 a.m. in an empty house, she starts drafting her legal counterclaim against James.
She starts fighting back.
She starts meticulously writing down the objective truth of what happened to her.
And that dry legal document begins to evolve. It turns into a deeply personal essay. And she decides to submit it to the New York Times Modern Love column.
Which is a huge deal.
Huge. And her family is absolutely terrified by this decision. They beg her not to publish it, fearing that James will retaliate with his massive wealth and just ruin her entirely in the divorce proceedings.
But she hit send anyway.
She hit send anyway. And we really have to look closely at the mechanics of this choice. Because writing this essay wasn't just some therapeutic journaling exercise to process her grief.
No, not at all.
It was a targeted public act of defiance.
Because narrative is the ultimate form of power.
Yes.
Whoever tells the story controls the reality of the situation. By putting her words into the public sphere, Belle is actively ruining the neat, consequence-free narrative that James tried to build for himself and his country club friends.
She refuses to be the quiet casualty.
Exactly. She stops the legacy of the women in her family swallowing men's bad behavior just to keep the peace.
She stops the generational cycle.
She really does. And if we look at the title of the memoir, Strangers, it operates on two distinct levels.
Okay, what's the first one?
Well, yes, she comes to the harrowing realization that the man she slept next to for 20 years was, ultimately, a stranger who could abandon her without a second thought.
Right, he was a stranger.
But much more importantly, by reclaiming her voice and refusing to stay silent, she finally stops being a stranger to herself.
Wow, that is powerful. We have covered immense ground today.
We really have.
I mean, we've gone from the shock of that empty osprey nest and the completely absurd distraction of a turkey sandwich.
Still can't get over the sandwich.
Right. Through the terrifying legal realities of financial dependency and unextinguished prenups, all the way to the ultimate triumph of a woman reclaiming control over her own story.
The core takeaway from Belle's experience here is that outsourcing your agency, whether it's assuming someone else will always protect your financial security, or relying entirely on someone else for your emotional stability, or silencing your own voice to make others comfortable, it's a risk you simply cannot afford to take, regardless of how much you love someone.
So to you listening, stay awake at the wheel of your own life, financially and emotionally. We've talked a lot today about how dangerous blind trust can be and the severe consequences of relinquishing your agency.
Absolutely.
But that leaves us with a difficult, almost philosophical paradox to mull over. If true, profound intimacy in a relationship actually requires total vulnerability and the lowering of all your defenses. But total vulnerability invites the exact kind of destruction that Belle faced. Is a completely safe marriage actually an oxymoron?
That is wow.
Right. Can you ever be truly protected and truly intimate at the exact same time? Or, if the foundational relationships in your life disappeared tomorrow, what parts of your identity, your security, and your voice would remain entirely yours, independent of anyone else?
A deeply complicated question to sit with.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.